Hi everyone, and welcome to the ProBuilder texturing part 2 tutorial, this being the UV editing tutorial here. So first of all, just before we jump into too much in this, I'd like to make sure everyone can see that the UVs are automatically taken care of for you, at least the basic tiling UVs. So as you are building items, for example over here, if I were to be moving this around or anything like that, as you can see, the UVs are completely taken care of for you. There's nothing that you actually need to do in order to have just simple tiling UVs. That's all done for you, but then later on you're eventually or definitely going to want to take these UVs and specialize them or customize them to make them fit better. So for example, we have items like these support beams or whatever these might be here, and rotate those UVs around, make the grain go in the correct direction, or make things like these tiles larger, etc. So that's where we need to open up the UV editor window from the main GUI panel here, and we can start editing the actual UVs. So this is the brand new for version 2.3 UV editor window. We're going to go over everything within this window that you can do and all the UV options that we have for ProBuilder 2.3 as of this video. You might be noticing first of all that we have a pretty crazy collection of UV faces and chunks here, and this is going to be a bit too much to deal with right away, so I'm just going to create a standard clean Unity cube and we'll work on the basics from there. So I will deselect the object, hit Control K to create a brand new cube, and let's zoom in down to this to take a look at it. So here's the cube itself. You can see that number one, the element mode follows between the scene view and the UV editor. So anytime you're swapping between these, it's going to do the same for the scene view, and you can see it reflected in the scene view itself. It is possible, however, to turn off the element mode in the scene view while still retaining element control in the UV editor, and this is in case you have something, again, for example with this item here, if I want to be able to edit the UVs on this but not have to see all of that showing up in the top here. If it were in vertex mode or such, it might get a little bit too heavy in the scene view, so it lets you do that. But normally you'll want to make sure you are in element mode in both the scene view and the UV editor. So with ProBuilder 2.3, you now have two different UV editing options. That is the auto mode, which is standard or default, and then you have the manual mode, which gives you full UV control. And we'll take a look at that one second. First of all, with auto, which again is just the standard mode, as I mentioned before, you're editing items. Let me turn off ProGrids so this is smoother. Okay, so as you're editing items, the UVs will automatically take care of themselves. No worries for that, they're just going to tile perfectly. However, you can also edit these and the tiling will still continue to work as you'd like. So I can turn on the scene editing via the button up here in the GUI panel for the UV editor, the little triple arrow up there. And this is the first way to edit your UVs in the auto mode. So now I can use the handle and simply move that around however I'd like. You can see it being reflected in the UV editor itself, which we'll look at in a moment. You can also rotate and scale. Very, very simple to do right within the UV editor. Another thing, so the second way of editing these is via the UV panel here. So you can set exact numbers. If I want the offset to be 1 and 5, and the scale to be 2 and 3 for some reason, or even 3.12 or 215, whatever it might be, you can set that directly there, as well as an exact rotation amount. Let's go ahead and set these back to standard 0 numbers. The third way to edit the auto UVs is also directly within the UV editor window. So I can move this, oops, lost selection, rotate, and scale. All the same as within doing via the scene view. Make sure, of course, that if you're going back to editing the geometry, you'll want to turn off the scene view controls just by clicking on that triple arrow at the top, and that will make sure that you're now able to edit the actual geometry. So again, let's set this back to something else. So now that we've edited it, or I'll maybe make it a little more of an edit here, something like that, you'll notice that you can still move this around and the UVs are going to continue automatically tiling. So that's the big benefit of using the auto UVs feature. The very simple auto UVs is that it'll always automatically tile for you. And you do have a few other options down here that you can look through, so you can flip the UVs horizontally or vertically. You can swap them both directions, set them to world space, and use the texture groups. Now, texture groups are something that are somewhat obsolete, and we're hoping to phase out with the new UV editor. But just to show how they work, if you have an item with, say, some extra faces like this, and I'll just move this around a bit to give it a general idea, and you'd like to have the texture seamlessly tile across all these faces, you can use the texture groups. So you'd select all the faces and click on Group Selected Faces, and now they will show up as one. So if I click on any one of these faces and go to move it, make sure I'm in the scene editing mode. Now if I move it, you can see they all move as one and they're tiling across perfectly. So that's very, very handy to have, but again, it's made somewhat obsolete by the new UV manual UV editor, which we'll look at in just a moment. One last item to mention here with the auto UVs is if you have a texture group like this, and then I'll turn off the scene control, and then if I am editing, if you're extruding onto that and such, it's not going to keep that texture group, so you'll need to add it in if you'd like to. However, if you move it, it's going to continue the automatic projection that it has. So even though that's already been set as a texture group, as you can see, the UVs continue to move along as best as it can assume, that it wants, or rather that you want these UVs to do, even as you're changing and editing those UVs, or sorry, the geometry. So it does a pretty good job of guessing what you'd like. However, when you get into something a bit more complex and you'd like to make sure that the UVs are exactly as you need, let's turn off the lighting here, then you'll need to move into the manual mode. So let's take a look at that next. To do so, I'm going to actually delete this object we've created and create something new again, just to keep it simple. So here we have, again, just a standard cube, and we're going to edit its UVs using the manual mode. When you first create any object, once again, it's going to just have the standard auto UVs set on it, but you can convert those over to manual in a couple different ways. Number one, by simply editing its verts, or you can just convert it to manual. Select any number of faces, let's say these three here, and I'll click on Convert to Manual, and now these are the manual faces. They will be highlighted in orange to show that they are. Any auto UV faces will be set in the blue color, so you can see quickly in the editor which are which, in case you have lots of different items. So right now, all these faces are piled onto one spot in the UV editor here. We can break those apart, select them all, and maybe try a planar UV. So that's going to project them all instantly in the average planar direction. You can use a box projection. Now we're going to have them brought up just like so. And we have several other options in the actions panel here, but before we get into that, I think it's best to take a look at the basics here. First of all, just like the auto UVs, you can also use the scene controls. So turning on that option, I can move it around right in the scene view, rotate and scale. No difference, so that stays exactly the same. And of course, you can edit them within the UV editor itself. Moving things around and editing within the UV editor here is really where ProBuilder's new UV editor has its power here. So you can edit exactly the same, or very much the same as in Max or Maya, Blender, any of those full 3D programs. So you have complete control over these. You can move them around and set them to exactly where you need it to be on the texture itself. And you'll also notice that there's a nice snapping going on. So if you move an object or a UV element next to something else, it will instantly snap to the others so that you can align things very easily. You can also hold Control on the keyboard and it will snap to a grid that's built in. So you can see it's snapping directly on while holding Control. Of course, as in the auto UVs, you can also rotate and scale right within here. But you can also get a lot more complex by then moving on to editing individual UVs if you'd like. It's a little hard to see, so I'll move this up to here. So I can edit these however I'd like to in case I really want it to for some reason. In this case it's skewing the texture up in an odd way, maybe not what we'd really want. But you can edit it exactly, and that's going to really come in handy when you have atlas textures and such that you want to fit items onto just as you need them to be. You can also edit via the edge modes, of course, just the same as in geometry, or very similar to that. And let's actually make this cube a bit more complex so we can start looking at the edits more easily. Let's undo these to bring it back to a simple shape. And I'm going to just do some, make sure and turn off the scene control for the UV editor if you want to edit the geometry. Do a few quick edits so that I can make this more interesting for the actual UV work. Make some strange shapes here. So pretty quickly we end up with something that wouldn't really work with standard tiling UVs, whether you're building some semi-complex object or something fairly organic. There we go. Who knows what, we have something there that requires a little bit more work. And here's where we can start using the manual UV editor really in earnest. First of all, you'll notice that all of the UVs, again as I'm editing and such and creating new geometry, they start off as the standard auto UVs, and let's just convert those all over to manual. I can drag select everything just in case. Now that I have both auto and manual selected, the UV panel, again just being smart, lets you know that you have mixed selection, and so it can't show any of the actual panel options, but it does let you know, would you like to convert these to manual or auto all at once. I'll convert them to manual, and now I have the options that I can use here. I could go about and move each of these faces apart and start putting them together as they fit. However, there's a lot of, there are many easier ways to do this. I'll select them all and just click on box to start with. Now it's instantly projected them out using a box method. So this doesn't look too bad. It's alright. It does a fair approximation of what I maybe would like this to be, but it's definitely not quite perfect. So I could start going in and manually editing these to match a bit better. For example, if I select, let's say, these and move these apart here, and I want these two, or this edges between these two faces to come together and match, as well as these actually. So I'm going to move this over. Right now they're both on the same place, and I don't want that to happen, so I can grab this one and this one and this one, and move it over, and manually align these together. Luckily this one right here is, and it will snap together using those snaps. I can bring this right up close, etc. Then I can go into the vertex mode, select these, and weld them together. So now if I click to select the full island, this is all one. I still need to weld those tops up there. Grab those UVs and click on weld. With that done, now I can double click and there's our full UV island all nicely welded together. Of course that's a bit tedious and you don't want to always have to do that step by step. Sometimes you'll need to for very complex objects, but we do have a special ability that we've added in called the auto stitch method. So if I just, well, let's go to the other side actually, or something even a bit more complex. And we can start from the very top here, and we want to start going down and unwrapping this whole piece here. So with any face selected, just hold Control and click on another manual face, and it will stitch it together. Let's take these and move it to an area we can see this a bit better. So as you can see here, it starts to build the UVs for you, just like that. I can go from here, or even if I'd like to make it a little more different, go from this one and start going over and down and so forth. Just like this. It might make more sense maybe to go down in that direction over and up. And very quickly you can use this. Oops, I want to start from here. You can use this to stitch together all your UVs. Just make sure that you're control clicking onto an adjacent face. So if I click on this face here, it just selects it. It can't actually stitch those two together since they are not connected. However, this one to this one will work just fine, and then to that one. We do have an overlap going, oops, going on here. You can see that this face, or this UV, is now overlapping onto that. Not a big deal. That's something that you can edit separately. Select these, move them off to the side, or maybe unwrap this slightly differently. All sorts of options you would have. Finish up this UV unwrap real quick. So very much looking forward to what everyone thinks of this new auto stitch method. I really hope it's extremely useful for everyone. Myself, I think it's a great way to do the unwrapping. It saves a lot of time and trouble. Very quickly like that, you can unwrap fairly complex objects without going into a lot of the tedious work that's usually part of unwrapping. It's taken care of for you for the most part. Obviously you will have to, of course, do some manual work. Things like this are going to overlap on their own, but you can take care of that by, for example, not moving off to the side like I did here. Would have been better to go straight down and in some other directions, doing that yourself. Speaking of those more manual editing options, this is where the actions palette over here comes in handy. So just like the geometry tools has its dynamic actions palette, you have the same thing over here for the UV actions. So I can select any UVs, and for example, starting from the top, we have the weld, where I can take UVs that are directly on top of each other, and if they aren't already connected, you can weld them together. You can collapse UVs, so if I really want these two, you can see that in the editor here. If I want these two to be collapsed directly together, I click on collapse, and I'll do that like such. Useful more if you're making something somewhat organic and it doesn't really matter if the UVs are getting stretched a little bit. You can just collapse them together and then they'll tile seamlessly together. Let's undo that in this case. You can also split UVs off, so if I select, say, these faces were all fairly terribly done. We could do that in a better way maybe. I can just click on split UVs, and now they are broken off from the rest. Or I could select just these also, and split those off, and then edit them individually if I'd like to. Also, while editing, a lot of times you may want to move, rotate, or scale items from an exact point, so you can always just left click on the handle here. Oops. Left click on the handle itself and move it anywhere you'd like on the object or on the UV element, the island here, and that's going to move the pivot for it temporarily. And it will snap to vertices, which is extremely handy. For example, if I want it to rotate around the bottom left corner here, now I can do that instead of it being in the center, and it will also scale directly from there, which is very, very handy to have. And once you reselect it, deselect and reselect, that pivot will reset back to the center, and you can reset it again if you need to. So a couple more options in the edit panel here. We have flip horizontal. If I have something like this element and I'd like to flip it completely, I click on the flip horizontal, or perhaps vertical if I'd like to, and those will just mirror it basically. It'll mirror the UVs in case you need to do that for any of your textures. You can also use the Fit UVs button to instantly fit it directly into the 0 to 1 UV space in case you have something that isn't supposed to tile and it needs to fit directly within the actual texture space. Just a quick note here, you can see the prototype texture showing up in the background. You can turn that on or off, or that would be whatever texture is on the currently selected object. You can turn that on or off with the Show Texture button in the top right here. And that's all the options at the moment for the ProBuilder version 2.3 UV editor. It's quite a bit to go through, and I know for sure that when I initially started working with the UVs way back in the day, they confused me completely. So if anyone has questions or such, feel free to ask, and we can go into more in-depth tutorials, of course, as well. These are some things you should definitely play around with. We really hope everyone starts moving from the auto to the manual controls. We have just so many great options in there, from whether you're using the simple and quick planar unwrap or using the auto stitch methods. There's just a lot of great options for you within here that will end up having a lot better looking level and such when you're building with that. But of course, at any point, if stuff starts not working out well for you, you can just convert back to auto and let it do all the work itself. One last thing in this tutorial, I think it makes sense to take what we've been doing here on this little test object, which I'll delete, and actually apply it to our real, or sort of real, demo level up here. So we started out initially saying that, number one, these wooden supports need to have the grain go in the correct direction. So we can edit this very simply. We could use the manual or auto, either would be fine. I maybe want this to continue tiling, so I'm going to use or stick with the auto method. So I'll make sure I have the element mode in both the scene and UV editor. And I can select that face, turn on the scene controls, and then I'm going to rotate this so that the grain fits properly. Very simple to do. I could also use the editor here, maybe get it a little more exact by doing it that way. Do the same thing. Actually, at this point it might be a better idea to simply delete the extra one here and duplicate this one over. No need to do work twice. So that has the grain fixed up. I suppose you could also do it on the other side. I'm going to be lazy just for the tutorial and leave that alone, pretend it's finished. And we can take a look at this area over here then, where we're going to make this look, make the tiling texture a lot smaller. So we can just select, I would take the top here and then grow the selection downward, make sure the angle is off. So now we can select all those faces and simply scale that up, rather down actually, so that they're using up less space. And it looks a little better. Of course, we do have, if I move these around, these are separate from each other, and we want them to tile across perfectly so there isn't this separation. So I can select these two faces and set them to group selected. And we could try and go around the corner, but if you do groups around corners, it starts to get a little funky where it's stretching it. So here we're going to then move into the manual mode so that we can have a bit more control over this. So I'm going to once again select all the faces by selecting the top, clicking grow, so I can grow the selection all the way outward. And then I'm going to convert all of these to manual. And I'll just move these out of the way a bit. And then we will start, let's just say from the top. And I'm going to use the auto stitch, so hold control, click on that one, control down to here, over to there, and start building these out. Maybe go from the top down here as well. Come to think of it, actually, that's probably not the best way. I should really start from the sides and go around, since that's where the seamless tiling will really be most noticeable. So there we have that, and then the tops we can just add on like so. And now we have our brick tiling seamlessly across all the way around with not much work at all. Of course, it's good to remember that if I turn off scene view mode, now that these are manual, as I move it, the UVs are going to stay the same. The UVs don't allow themselves to be edited unless they are in auto mode. So if you do need this to tile again, you can just select these, set them back to auto, and now it's going to tile, although its center is a little bit off, so you might have to go in and edit that a bit as well. In this case, we'd probably want to just keep them as manual and edit it as needed. So one last thing, maybe the large pathway here, we want this to all be one nice simple unwrap. So I could go through and use the auto stitch method, like such, all the way around. Or another option would be just to select all the top faces at once. I'll select a couple of them here to make this quick. Click on, actually turn the angle on for the grow, so set it at 45 in this case. And we'll just grow the selection until we have all those top faces, convert them to manual, and then click planar. So we have one giant planar unwrap, which will come in the midst of all this here. Let's move that out, and there it is. Obviously we'd want to scale this a bit, so it's, oops, make sure you have the scene view controls on so you can control the UVs from the scene view. And now we'll scale that down to whatever size we'd like, something like that perhaps. So very simple to do. As you can see there are tons of different options for however you'd like to do the UV editing. We've made sure that however you are, there's always, however you prefer to work, there's probably an option that'll work best for you versus any of the others. So that's it for UV editing. We'll definitely be adding in more features as we go as well, so make sure you're checking for the latest updated info and tutorials and version by going to procore3d.com. And thanks for watching. We'll see you in the future tutorials.